All right, so today what we're going to do is go through the rise of the Industrial Revolution. We'll do causes, we'll do effects, and then we'll look at one of the primary effects of the Industrial Revolution, which is that we start to get some new economic systems. And the three that we'll talk about will be capitalism, communism, and socialism. It's meant to be like an introduction, and we'll track these systems as we go throughout history. So, let us begin with this picture here. I start out with class talking about, is technology a good thing? And we can look at it economically, we can look at it socially, and even politically. Here's what I want you to know: not all groups liked the Industrial Revolution, and many groups, many people started to see that the Industrial Revolution was going to take away their jobs. The idea that you can get a machine to do what a craftsman could do, and you can do it for cheaper. And so the craftsmen started to really die away. People who were specialists in the textile industry now were replaceable by a machine. And so some people rose up together and they called themselves the Luddites, and the Luddites took to task to destroy machines, go after, this new mechanized labor force, and try to fight back against the Industrial Revolution. So just want you to keep in the back of your mind that while the Industrial Revolution has some positives, it's going to also have some negatives too. So your vocab for the Industrial Revolution is here. So when we have a surplus, when we have more food than what we necessarily need, that frees up the labor force, right? If we have more people being able to go out and work in the factories because food production is high, because you can get a few farmers to make sure that your agriculture output is really strong, then you have a lot of people that can go out and work in those factories. And we'll talk about how that is accomplished in just a minute. These big corporations are going to start to be formed. That is, that you start to get one company that's going to control a lot of smaller businesses and eventually lead to monopolies and things like that. We'll see urbanization. When I use that word, I'm talking about a flood to the cities. Urban means city. Capital means money. Textile means clothing. And last but not least, to fuel the Industrial Revolution, we're going to see a rise in imperialism. That is, once the nations that industrialize use their own natural resources, they decide to go out and take natural resources from other people. And imperialism is when a stronger nation, not necessarily a bigger one, but when a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation for economic or military gain. What they will do is they will take over places in Africa and use them as natural resource deposits, where they can just take from these nations, and then either sell those resources in the form of diamonds, for example, or use those resources for their own industrial output. So they might take rubber and use that so that eventually they can use that for their wheels for the automotive industry, things like that. They could also use these places for military bases to launch attacks and like that. So we'll see both aspects, but imperialism is going to be driven because the Industrial Revolution starts and they start to say, hey, we're running out of coal, we need to get it from other places, for example. Okay. So the Industrial Revolution, we consider it a turning point in history. This is where everything changes. We're going to see the rise of nationalism, the rise of imperialism. It has a direct result from the Industrial Revolution. And an easy way to remember it: hand to machine, home to factory. That's like the basic idea behind the Industrial Revolution. So it's hand to machine, it's home to factory. And it begins in Great Britain, and it begins in the textile industry. What's textile but clothing? Okay, that's where it'll start. So there you go, Great Britain on an island. It's why Great Britain is going to be such a powerhouse, because they get the Industrial Revolution first. And we'll talk about why they are the first. They have a lot of the conditions to allow for the Industrial Revolution to happen. So they have an Agrarian Revolution. Basically what happens is the people turn to technology like the seed drill and fertilizer, and this allows crops to be made in surplus. The idea is that the seed drill is going to make it so that you can use your land more efficiently, and if you can afford this technology, then you can produce more crops than your competition. Therefore, you can lower your price, and when you lower your price because you have more product, that allows you to get people to buy from you more. And so these we'll refer to them later as, the larger farmers who have the seed drill and the fertilizer as access and have the capital to do so, they're able to create products cheaper, and therefore people buy from them, and so they are able to wipe out the competition. Small farmers who don't have the money to invest in a seed drill can't compete with the big farmers who have larger tracts of land, and therefore can really provide a surplus for Great Britain as a whole. And I just want you to know that this is in collaboration with the British government. So the British government sees that the small farmers are not using the land maybe to its maximum capacity. They're sharing the land, allowing each other to graze on different pastures, and it's something that the British government did not want to have happen anymore. And so what they did is they provided what's called the Enclosure Movement. They closed off the tracts of land to make it very specific. This is your land, and this is my land, right? And the Enclosure Movement really pushed out small farmers, because what happened is they no longer had access to these larger tracts of land, and they were able to essentially enclose the small farmers and really give more land to the big farmers. And if you're like, no, Mr. Casey, how does this happen? It still happens today. We have something called eminent domain in our government, where the government can come in and tell you they need the land for some government purpose, and they will pay you for your land, but ultimately they can buy you out of your land. It's called eminent domain. Look it up. And that's basically what they're doing. The Enclosure Movement is they are forcing the small farmers out of their land and giving larger tracts of land to the bigger farmers who have the seed drill, who can maximize the land. And the idea is that all these small farmers now, they don't have a job anymore. They can't compete with the big farmers. And so they're being bought out, they're being pushed out, and they're eventually going to go to the cities. So I asked my students, is this really are they choosing to go to the cities? Is this a literal choice? And the students eventually arrive at the idea that it's not. It's not really a choice. If you want to feed your family, you have to move to the city. You can try to hold out. You can really try, but if you don't have the capital necessary to compete with these larger farmers, you're going to be enclosed. You're going to be pushed out. You're going to be pushed to the cities. So the Enclosure Movement is another cause. Small farmers are going to lose out via competition and via the government pushing them out through the Enclosure Movement. And this is like the result, the Enclosure Movement there. Now, other causes. You have what we call an abundance of natural resources. There are two that I really want you to know. They have a lot of coal deposits in Great Britain, which is going to fuel the steam engine, and that's going to allow them to be more successful than other nations, at least early on. And they also have natural waterways, so they can get the coal out very quickly and very efficiently because they have all these little rivers and canal areas that they can get the product. So if the coal's in the interior, in say a place like Manchester, they can get it out to London quickly because they have all these little waterways. So when I say natural resources, I'm talking about waterways. Another cause is colonies. So in order to purchase the seed drill, you need to have some money. And so the colonies that Britain had, and I'm not really focusing on America at this point. America has gained its independence, but some of the colonies that they won from the Napoleonic Wars in Africa, they're going to use to make money off of. And Britain did two things. What they would do is they would take the natural resources from these colonies, but they would also use the colonies as a market. And so they would produce finished goods, let's say shirts and pants from the textile industry, and they would sell them to their colonies at a marked up price. So they not only are taking the valuable things, natural resources, but they're also using the people as a place where they can sell their goods to at a high price. So, Britain's colonies are giving them the money they need to invest more in technology and therefore more in industry. They can start to use that excess money so that they can make this industrial revolution happen. They have the reserves necessary to invest. Okay. So, how do you remember the causes of the industrial revolution? Because that's a lot, right? Break it down. You've got money from the colonies. You've got the Enclosure Movement, where small farmers are pushed out because big farmers have access to the technology, and they also have the government on their side pushing the small farmers out and closing their land. You have natural resources, the two, coal and water, and then you have the technology, the seed drill and fertilizer. And there's more to technology, of course. There's so much more to technology. The steam engine's a great example of technology. The power loom's an example of technology. And you'll eventually write an essay in which you're going to talk about some of the technology of the Industrial Revolution. We won't talk about all of it. You'll pick a few and have to write about them. So here's the result. You get the factory system, you get the crowded cities, you get some pollution, and I guess we should debrief all of those effects. So, number one, you get mass production, and when you get mass production, you're able to sell things cheaper. Of course, if I have more of something, I'm able to put it at a lower price. And you see there the assembly line of America. Like, think of that as like your example, right? If you can produce a lot of things, a lot of cars, for example, you can sell those cars at a cheaper rate. Regents answer, whenever you see the effects of the Industrial Revolution, one of the things they ask you about is the growth of the middle class. There is an idea behind the Industrial Revolution that more people are going to start their own businesses, and as a result, there's going to be a huge rise in the middle class, where not necessarily just poverty or just like super wealthy, but somewhere in the middle. So total Regents answer, go at it. This is the one. You gotta know it. The growth of the middle class. There's also a rise in big business too. Let's not be too lax on the big businesses. There are going to be some corporations, some big corporations that develop and use their power to really control some of Britain's foreign policy. Some of these companies are going to take advantage of imperialism, and they're going to take control of places like India, for example. And so we'll see that, we'll look at it later, but just know that these big businesses are starting to grow. Other causes, which I'll spend a little bit of time talking about, is the new economic systems. You've got capitalism, socialism, and communism. I'll break them down for you and give you the essential points. Will I tell you everything about each system? Of course not, and that's for you to take to economics in 12th grade. But I'll give you the basics. We've talked about this. Imperialism is going to be on the rise. I'll spend a whole unit on imperialism in which we, break it down, but I want you to know that imperialism is fueling the Industrial Revolution. The more natural resources you can have, the more you can fuel your revolution, your factories. You can also take those goods that you're finishing and sell them right to your colonies. So it's both sides, okay? There are going to be some problems of urbanization as well. So when we flood to the cities, you get pollution, you get diseases like cholera, for example, breaking out. In Mankind, the Story of Us, it shows the cholera outbreak in London, where they put the sewers too close to the drinking water, and you can imagine what kind of gross stuff starts to happen there. And then you also get the rise in child labor. And, here's some pictures just to give you an idea. I mean, kids working out there as young as, 6, 7, 8 years old. I don't know, maybe younger, but the idea that children have to work. They don't go to school. They don't have that opportunity to rise up in society the way that you do. They are stuck in the labor force. And, some students, and I don't know how you can, but I do get some students that are like, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to go to work. Do you want to work in the coal mines like this kid? Get black lung and die before you reach 20 years old? Do you want to be in a situation with this girl where she doesn't get to play, she doesn't get to have fun, right? She is forced to work and work and work, and then she does not take her money home and buy herself an Xbox or put her money into her derby car. Okay, she's going to take that money, she's going to give it to her parents so that she can survive for another day, for another week. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is an awful system. This is an ugly system. I'll give you an example. So you got these kids here who are supposed to be standing up straight, right? Well, the kids are working 12, 14-hour days. Give you an idea of that. I mean, what are we in school from 8 to 3? And are you really learning for 8 hours? No, you're not even going to school for 8 hours, okay? These kids are going to school or going to work for 12 hours. They're on their feet for 12 hours. And some of the kids would get tired because, it's natural. I mean, they're tired because when they go home from work, they have to do their chores at home, And so they come on, they're tired. And so one of the bosses sometimes would have a bucket in the corner, cold water, and they just splash kids, wouldn't let them know it's coming and just splash them, wake them up. But some of the kids, after a couple 12-hour shifts are really tired. And so what they would do is sort of like this fear tactic is they get a little chain around the kid's neck, and on the end of the chain would be a ball, and the ball would hang from their back. And what they would have to do is keep they have to lean forward. They have to keep their head up, because the chain had a weight. Obviously at the end, this ball has weighted them down. And so they've got to keep their head up throughout. It's an ugly, ugly, ugly system. And, of course they're hiring these kids because their kids, their hands are, small, so they can fix the machines, and they're getting their fingers cut off and chopped off in these machines. And it is nasty. It's ugly, to say that these children are forced to do it, but that was the reality of the Industrial Revolution. So there's a negative effect for you. And I stop here at this photograph just to have my students imagine, what is this girl looking at? What is she thinking? What is she seeing? Is she seeing other kids out there playing on the playground and wondering, wishing like, man, what could my life be like? Or I wish I could do that, because not every kid had to work. The richer folk didn't have to have their kids work. They could go to school. But she couldn't, right? She was born to poverty, and so she had to work. Other effects. Some workers came together and said that's not right. First, we're not getting paid a livable wage. Second, the factory conditions are horrible. And third, children should not have to work, at least not at that age. And so what they did is they formed labor unions. Here's the idea. A group of workers come together. They argue for better pay, better working conditions. The concept behind a labor union is that if one worker comes to a boss and says, I need more money to feed my family, that boss can say, get out of here. I don't want to hear that. Okay? They can fire you. But if every worker comes together and says, we're not going to work until you give us better pay, better working conditions, etc., now the boss has to fire everybody. Okay, or now the boss has to let everybody go. And then he's got to replace all those workers. He's got to train all those workers too, right? So the idea behind it is it's more likely that you'll be successful if everybody comes together and argues for pay rather than just one person. It's harder for a boss to fire a group of workers. It's much easier to fire just one worker. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So there are two ways that a labor union really works together to get a solution. The first is striking, and I'm sure you've seen that before, right? You get out there, you refuse to work until your boss makes conditions better or increases your pay. And certainly that's one way, and it can be an effective way. The second way is through collective bargaining. And in class, we engage in collective bargaining, right? We have the model contract. Collective bargaining, essentially you sit down and you negotiate your salary, and it's a back and forth, and the union has a person that sits down and represents all workers, and the employer sits down and has this back and forth. Sometimes there's somebody in the middle called an arbitrator who will propose fair contracts and help you to make sure that both sides are being fair. And that's something that we didn't really do, but it's something that in modern collective bargaining you'll see a lot more of. But the essential idea is that the bosses and the workers sit down and have a civil conversation about this is what I want. And there's a give and take, So I might get more pay, but I have to pay more towards my health insurance. Something like that, okay? Or we'll fix the lighting, but the workers are going to have to do the work necessary to fix the lighting, or they might have to work a night shift, or something like that. So, collective bargaining, another result of the Industrial Revolution. All right, so we made it. The Industrial Revolution, you've got your causes through MENT, M-E-N-T, right? The Industrial Revolution isn't meant to happen, and I've just went through a bunch of effects with you. And of course, there's many, many more, guys. I just, scratched the surface on this stuff, but it'll give you a good frame of reference to study the Industrial Revolution at the least. One of the biggest effects was the new economic systems, and so I want you to know a couple of things about them. First, what is an economy? I have a definition there, but I'll explain it a little bit. An economy is like if I could track a dollar bill, okay? Track the dollar bill as, you buy something with it. And then the factory uses that dollar bill to, invest in a worker and give them their salary. And then that worker goes out and that worker goes and spends it on groceries. And it's like this cycle where you'll see people using the money throughout all levels. So through the production of a good, right? The factory takes the dollars and they make a machine, right? And then those dollars are then used to pay for a truck to bring the factory goods to the consumer, and the consumer then uses dollar bills to buy the said good, right? It's the flow of money, if you will. That is an economy all the way through the production, through the distribution, and then through the actual consumption of those goods. Laissez-faire, when I say laissez-faire, I need you to do something. I need you to say hands off and put your hands up in the air, right? Laissez-faire, hands off. Laissez-faire economic ideology means that the government stays out of the economy. It doesn't regulate it. It doesn't tell businesses what to do. It doesn't tell them how to do it. It just lets them do it. The idea came from a guy named Adam Smith who said, listen, businesses want to make money, right? That's the idea. You go into business to make money. So let them make the money. Let them do the things that are going to make them successful. And what you'll see in an economy is that if you're good at doing business, you'll thrive and the economy will be great. And the businesses that don't do so well, that have bad ideas, they'll fail. They'll go away. Why does the government need to step up and tell businesses what to do? Let the businesses work themselves out, okay? If a business is charging too much, people will go to another business, okay? And they'll buy from a different business, and therefore that other business will then fail or reduce their prices. It's this idea of natural competition in the market, okay? So that's the basic idea of laissez-faire. On the other side is a command economy, where the government controls it and government regulates prices. And the idea behind a command economy is people will get greedy, they'll charge the consumers too much, and what will start to happen is, with no regulation of business, and business greed will take over, and they'll charge the consumers too much, and the people on top will make too much, and it won't be fair to the people who are busting their tail working hard every day. And so a command economy says you need to regulate price. You need to tell businesses what they're doing, how they're doing, and when they're doing. So, you're going to make this quota, you're going to sell it at this price, and here are the profits you're going to make. Government, command economy. We'll see that in a communist society. When I use the word proletariat, I'm talking about the workers, and an entrepreneur, somebody who's trying to own a business. Okay, so the one word I should probably have up here is bourgeoisie. And if you remember from the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie is the middle class. Okay, we'll see that word as we progress here. So I want you to be able to label this spectrum independently, of course. I want you to be able to do it. So on the right side, you've got communism. This is total government control. Like, the government has its hands on big and small businesses. There is not private ownership under a communist society. That is, you can't technically own your own business. You can, work at your own business, but communism believes that businesses exist for the benefit of the majority. That a factory exists for the benefit of the majority, and so we're supposed to share the profits of what we make, and we're supposed to ultimately allow the government to disperse profits fairly and equitably so that everyone gets a cut. So under a communist society, no one should be struggling, but no one should be making way more than anybody else either. So we're all sort of at this middle ground, this middle level. That's the idea behind communism, is that you ultimately are going to have an equal society. You do that by having the government control everything, okay? Socialism is somewhere in the middle. Socialism says, well, to control every business is a almost impossible endeavor. To control everything is too difficult. So socialism says the big businesses are going to be controlled by the government, that workers will share in the profits in these bigger factories and bigger corporations. Doesn't mean that you can't have some small business control, but it's the big businesses that need to be highly regulated by the government. Okay, things like healthcare would need to be regulated by the government. A big system like education be regulated by the government. Those are socialist ideas. Big business controlled by the government. Small business still has their independence. And then a capitalist system says no. The best way to run to run an economy is to let all businesses be owned privately by entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur, a business owner, should not be told what he can produce or what to sell it at. Let the economy go, right? Laissez-faire, hands off the economy from the government, okay? So big businesses, small businesses, they're all going to be deregulated so that you can let them do what they want, let the economy work on its own. So the United States would be an example where you've got, capitalist ideas, at least. Socialist countries, a lot of the European countries like Norway, Finland, for example, socialist. And a communist country would be an example like Vietnam, for example, or North Korea is a communist country. China is difficult because economically it's very capitalist, but politically it's very communist. So that's a little bit bad of an example. It's the USSR during the Cold War is a great example of communism, and we'll study it in length. So, what is each? Capitalism hands off the government, and government hands off the economy, like stay out, okay? Let big business and small business compete. Socialism says you got to control big business, but let the small businesses go. And then communism says control all business, okay? So, there's your spectrum. So, capitalism. It's a free market economy. You should associate those words together, right? Capitalism with free market. It's where the business is owned by everyday entrepreneurs. The government stays out, and the guy who's sort of like the father of capitalism, if you will, is Adam Smith, and he writes a book called The Wealth of Nations. A wonderful bonus question, I'm telling you, that would be great. And Adam Smith comes up with the concept of laissez-faire. He says, government should stay out and allow competition, natural competition in the economy to make things strong. So, laissez-faire, hands off the economy for the government. And there he is. The most boring man in history is Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, capitalist ideology. All right, socialism in the middle. The idea behind socialism is that workers can control the business and share the profits, right? The idea that in these big businesses, that the government would regulate them, and that the big businesses would make sure, or the government would make sure that big businesses treat their workers fairly and share in those profits. In some Latin American countries, they believe in socialism, and so what they try to do is let the workers actually own the factories. They therefore would share the profits, and so the factories are successful as long as the workers put in the work and everyone works hard. So it's this idea that the big businesses are going to be controlled by the government, at least regulated in some way, and the workers are supposed to get some fair wages behind them. They say in a capitalist society, what happens is the business owners make the most money, and their workers, because there's no government help, end up being taken advantage of. And so socialism tries to fight against that. All right, we've done this. And now on the other side, you've got the communist ideology, and the guys who are associated with this would be Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Okay, Engels and Marx write the Communist Manifesto against capitalism. They're really angered by capitalism. They see the horrors of capitalism. The child labor, the fact that the ugliness of urbanization, the pollution that it's causing, and the fact that these big business owners are just getting wealthier and wealthier, and the workers are getting poorer and poorer, and the gap between rich and poor is just being further and further. For Karl Marx, the world looks like this. He says, in a capitalist system, the people on top are supported by the people on the bottom. And the people on the bottom, the workers, are just, hanging on because they've got to hold everything else up. And these people on top are doing nothing but just taking advantage of the workers. And they said they need to topple this system. And so, how do you do it? Well, in a communist society, the end goal is to have equal distribution of wealth, that everyone is equal, both socially but also economically. That's the goal in a nutshell. Does it ever work out that way? Well, that's a discussion for an entirely different day. But here's communism on its basics. You control everything. The consumption, distribution, the production of goods. You tell people how much they can have. You tell them how much they can buy it at. You tell them where it's going to be bought at. Okay? Private property is totally not allowed. So in a communist society, traditionally what people will do is they'll live in like a communal village with communal apartment buildings where every apartment is the same style, same layout, everything is the same. You're really going for making sure that no one is better than anybody else. And everyone has different jobs, but ultimately the idea is that no one makes any more money than anyone else, and no one has to live in a poor, terrible conditions like capitalism says. No, everyone lives in the same conditions, okay? And we struggle together and we prosper together. Now, does that mean that everyone shares their own, one toothbrush or something? No, of course not. There's got to be, some individuality, but they're really trying to take that out of society as best they can. So, here's where Karl Marx gets a little wild. He writes in the Communist Manifesto, he's like, the Industrial Revolution is terrible. It's awful. It's produced inequality. It's produced a rich elite and a poor majority. Now, one could argue feudalism didn't do much better, but here's the idea here. He says the workers, the proletariat, are going to rise up. He says eventually they're going to get so angry and annoyed at the system, and poverty is going to get so bad, they're going to rise up, and the majority is going to win. They're going to overthrow the rich. He says they're going to come after that bourgeoisie, that middle class to rich people, and they're going to do it in a violent way. He says the only way that the rich are going to listen is if they see violence. Okay. He says you need to go to your boss's house. You need to, just kill all of the rich, burn their factories down, burn their houses down. He said in that horrible violence, he says out of it we'll create this beautiful classless society where there is no rich, there is no poor, there is just people and workers, and we all work together to create this classless society, and we need to make sure that everybody is equal. Okay, so it's a struggle between the rich and the poor, and ultimately it's a violent one where the poor rise up and overthrow the rich. And the goal is ultimately for the workers to control the economy and create this total equal society. And he says, and he predicts, that it's going to occur in industrialized cities like Britain, like we'll see later in Germany. Okay? He says in industrialized cities, that's where the communist revolution is going to occur. He was wrong, by the way. Okay, he saw it as where the most inequality was is where it would spring up. It actually occurs in Russia, which was a highly agrarian society. That will be where it starts to spring up with Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and of course, a whole nother story for another day. So I leave you with this. Okay, you got capitalism over there. And then you got socialism on the right. And the idea behind this cartoon, of course, the message, if you will, is that capitalism, all the profits are going to the entrepreneur, to the business owner. But in socialism, the idea is that those workers are happier because they're working so that they get some of the profits of the factory. Take out the boss, if you will. Make sure that the government's in control. And how does it show bias? It obviously is biased towards capitalism, right? This is a negative outlook on capitalism. This is looking at capitalism as an unfair and unequal system. Okay, so I hope that was a good review for you of Karl Marx, of Adam Smith, and give you a basic behind socialism and the big business control. This stuff is really important. This is the foundation. This is the bedrock of what I'm going to be teaching you for the rest of the year. So if it didn't click, go back, listen to this again. Make sure you know the differences between capitalism, between socialism, and between communism. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope this helped.